Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm Jenn Baljko, founder of Always On My Way and the creator of the Fierce Awakened Woman Online Summit. This is a virtual gathering of the brave and gentle-hearted who are following impulses for freedom, returning to the global village to share our unique gifts, and inventing new ways forward for ourselves and for our communities. We are celebrating our dynamic feminine grace, activating our grounded masculine courage so we can all be fierce, fun, and fantastic. Allow yourself to drop into the session with an open heart, an open mind. Feel into your sense of awareness. Tap into your inner strength and wisdom. And get ready to leap into your enlightened, embodied, and expressive self as we learn from others who have already sparked their joy journey. As you settle in and tune into what's present today, please join me in welcoming Veronica Hanekom. Veronica was born in April 1931 in Cape Town, South Africa. She was one of 4 children born to Dort Dawood Khan and Lizzie McGregor. Her mother died when she was 5 years old, and her father, who traveled extensively as a salesman, left Veronica and her siblings in the care of his sisters. He would remarry and have 3 more children. Life with her aunts would not be pleasant, and they felt that they were used as servants. The abuse and neglect would have Veronica hospitalized with malnutrition. Veronica's mother's family would be her refuge, and she loved spending time with them, which was often because they lived close by. Veronica married in her 20s and became the mother of 6 children. As they grew up in the APARTHEID years, Veronica and her husband were determined to give their children the best education they could. With this decision made, she proceeded to illegally place her children into white schools. And this was illegal because they were classified as colored or mixed race and lived in designated colored areas in South Africa. Veronica's family had migrated from Zimbabwe, Rhodesia, and were looking for schools to place her children in. As the years progressed, she would start helping other families to put their children into white schools. And she found by doing it quietly and without fanfare that the nuns and priests who ran the Catholic white schools offered little or no resistance. But the challenge arrived when, at the height of the 1976 riots, when her son would be called up to do compulsory military service, which was for whites only. Being colored and illegally in white schools made the family vulnerable for punishment by law, and not knowing how severe the punishment would be, they applied for and immigrated to Australia in December of 1977. For all the years living under apartheid, they fiercely rejected the idea that they were less than and lived their lives ignoring those rules. They lived across the divide cautiously, but not fearfully. And the class system has had its negative effects on Veronica, and she still struggles today with some of those issues. But she's learned much from reading from authors like Deepak Chopra and the late Dr. Wayne Dyer and other spiritual authors. And just on a personal note here, when I heard, I know her son Leon, and when I heard this story, I really hoped that Veronica would join this conversation because there is so much wisdom cross-generationally. And women have been stepping up and doing fierce things for our whole humanity. And it's Veronica's story that I think will resonate with so many people right now in a world that's still struggling with these same issues. So join me in welcoming Veronica Hanekom. Hi, Veronica. It's so
Hi,
nice to have you here. How are
Jenn.
you?
I'm fine, thank you. And
Good.
you, Jen, you're such a beautiful lady.
Thank you. It comes from my mother's side and my father's side.
Yes.
Thank you. But let's
Okay.
let's jump in, Veronica. What brave things you've done in your life. Just tell me a little bit about growing up in South Africa, because you grew up at a time before apartheid was officially in place, right? And then you saw how that came into force and raised children in that time of really severe uprisings. How how
Yes.
how was it when you were growing up in South Africa at the time?
For me, I, you know, what I felt at that time, it didn't bother me because I could go anywhere. And with my husband, uh, he was a worker and he used to just work. But when I met him, his sister was not very dark skinned, but she just wanted me to go with her to the movies. And we would only go to the white movies where, just whites.
Mm-hmm.
And she used to trust me to take her there. But apart from them, when it came to my children, I used to feel that when they're old enough and they going to school, it's definitely not going to be where they have plants that they have to put in the ground, because that's what I saw that particular day when they had the school going children, and some of my son's friends were in that school. And that's when I decided that that's not going to happen to my children, to go to a color school where they have to work outside in the grounds of the school instead of inside the school to learn. And that's when it hit me. I'm going to put my children in a school, and the only school that was available was the Catholic schools. And that's where I went, and I enrolled them as they were growing up. So Margot was the first one that went to the school. And then Shirley, they called me and said that she's not doing so well in the school. So she was a little bit slow. But then they transferred her just across from Springfield Convent East School, where I put them. And then I went to go and take Shirley in. They asked me, can they put her into St. Anne's School, because there's a slower group of children. So that's where Shirley went, because she didn't do so well at school.
But let me
So,
let, let me just ask you, like, how was this distinguished in South Africa at the time? There were blacks and colored, which were the mixed race people, and then the whites. And you were living in a designated area for colored people,
yes,
which would be mixed race, right? So you were
yes,
only allowed to send your children to certain schools then. Is that correct? Is that how that
yes,
worked?
yeah,
Okay.
yes, it was. They wanted to know your address and all of that.
Mom, we were lucky because our address was Wetton, which
Yes,
the same suburb, so the
yes,
same name. Wetton was colored.
Wetton was colored and white. But when we moved in there, it was just a white area.
They've just been reclassified.
And then it was reclassified, so to coloreds. But I already lived there.
Right.
I lived there. So,
So your own
well,
neighborhood
do you
was
know that?
being changed, right? So you were living in a designated area at one
Yes,
point, and then with apartheid, it reclassified and
yes,
it became a different designation, right?
yes,
Can I? Am I
yes,
allowed
yeah,
to interrupt? Can I
yes.
interrupt?
Sure.
Of
Just
course you can.
introduce
Can
it.
I?
This is Veronica's daughter, Margot, who is Veronica's
Yes.
caretaker as well. And please share.
And I do a lot of talking for my mom. I don't have much patience. And it was like, no, mom, don't say that. Say it this way.
Yeah.
So sorry for my interruption.
It's okay.
Wetton, where we live, I think it had been reclassified, and that's why we were allowed to move in there, I think. So Wetton was colored on one side of the railway line, and it was white on the other side of the line. So that when we gave our address, it wasn't questioned because Wetton was also white on the other side of the
Okay.
line, so to speak.
Okay, so there
Yeah.
was this sort of, okay, you could have gone to the white schools because you were in a neighborhood that had, or in a part of town that was designated as both and had been reclassified.
Yes.
So it
Yeah.
wasn't only like the black neighborhood. It wasn't only the colored neighborhood. In the town, in the part that you lived in, there was a distinction. There was, on the one side of the railway was one way, and then the other side of the rail lines were another distinction.
Correct.
Okay. No, this is
Yes.
really helpful because I don't know how much we all know about what was happening in South Africa at the time, right? Like I remember knowing about this in the 80s when I was a teenager, when it was still not the 1970s riots, but still very much in the consciousness globally that South Africa was experiencing this. But to be on the ground there, to even realize within one area you might have a couple different designations of how you could
Yeah.
move and go to school and work and do this. So
Yeah. I think we were lucky in that the area we lived in was called Wetton because we could have been in other areas that were definitely colored. You know what I mean?
right.
But we were fortunate in that they reclassified the one side of Wetton as colored, but the white side was called Wetton as well. So it sort of wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem because Wetton could be colored and it could be white. And another thing I need to say, I think, is that in Cape Town, not necessarily in other parts of South Africa, but in Cape Town, the borderline as like white and colored was broad because there was so much intermarriages and white men, colored women, whatever. It was really broad, so you could look colored, but because, that was it. If your father was classified as white, then you were white. Even if you were not really white skinned, you know what I mean? So
Right.
that's why it was easy in Cape Town to be like, you may not look like my nose doesn't look white at all, but if like, I guess we were fair enough that it wasn't questioned because in Cape Town you could have darker skinned people, but because their father was classified as white, they would be considered white.
Okay.
Whereas my mum and dad were both classified colored, but my mum, even more than my dad, my mum was fair skinned. And so that's why we were able to slip through the cracks, so to speak.
Okay. And thank you so much, Margaret. This is, and these are important distinctions that I think would be really helpful because to just have the context of what was going on, right? Because Cape Town was a little bit different than Johannesburg, and of course all the the riots that we all know about in Soweto in the 1970s. It's that you did have a more broad definition there because there was so many different types of intermarriages and just for clarity, your dad was also colored then, right? Because your
Yes.
mom and dad were both classified in this, and the way that we're talking about colored in this context is mixed white and black race, right? This intermarriage between white and black, right? Just so that we all have the same working definition, because it might mean different things to different people in different parts of the world. So great. So because you lived in this area of Cape Town where you could do this, so Veronica, how did you, when you saw these people working outside the school and you said, no, my kids are going to school and getting educated, and my kids are going to have opportunity in life that wouldn't be afforded to them if they had stayed in the colored schools. How did you begin the conversation with the Catholic schools? How did you approach them? How were you able to move into that?
Well, yes. Well, I always wanted my boys to go to a boys' school, but my girls were older, so I put them. And there was a school, a Springfield convent. So I put my children there, and there was no questions. They just accepted, because yeah, I'm the mother, and yeah, I'm bringing my children, I want to enroll them. And that's what I did. No fear whatsoever. I just went in there, and I've got so many children, and I want them to come to the school. And they were accepted, and they loved it. And, you know, when my boys started their school, they had, in the area, there was now colored people moving in there, and those children became their friends. The neighbors' children was fair-skinned, beautiful children, and they used to play with my children, with my two boys. But that's just how my boys did have a hard time at one time when they called them play whites.
Play white. That was the other thing. Jen, just FYI, I hope you guys don't mind, but every now and then I'm going to burst in and have something to say. Is that okay?
It's okay. It's totally okay. And because I think having you pop in and just explain some of this, play white. That's what your brothers were called. What does that mean?
That's what we
play
were
white.
all. That's what we were all called in the neighborhood that we lived in, the colored neighborhood. That's what the kids would call us there, because they could tell by our school uniforms that we were going to white schools. So they would tease and call us play white. So
you were pretending to be white. That you were pretending to be white because you were going to the white schools.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
But so then, well, Margaret, let me just ask you and Veronica, how did that make you feel? Because of course you want to have the best, Veronica, you want to give your children the best education you possibly could. It seems like the nuns and the priest were willing to help you maneuver around the law to make this happen. And we'll go back to that, because I'd like to know what the risk was there, because I sense that there was a risk in doing this. But just the whole feeling of then knowing that your kids were being called play white, like they were facing this racial discrimination at young ages.
Jen, can I just say this?
Please. Yeah.
They
Please.
never mentioned it to me. My children never came home to tell me they are being called
Play white. So I guess then it was something that us as children just lived with. It wasn't something perhaps that we told mum and dad about, because my mum was always working anyway. She worked, we had maids, and so we would come home from school to the maids. And so I don't think it's not something necessarily that my mum and dad would have been aware of. I know that my mum was very forceful, and I can't remember if it was before we started going to white schools, because I started in a colored school. I went to I don't know, first few years I was at a colored school.
Okay.
And And I remember that on a Saturday morning, my mum would go to town and on a bus. And my mum, the 4 seats at the front of the bus was designated for whites only. The rest of the bus was for coloreds and blacks. And I remember my mum would get on that bus and she would walk to the front of the bus and sit down in the white seats. And it would pain me. It would be a horrible, and I'd like stand next to her, like in the aisle. And she would tell me to sit down. And I wouldn't want to sit down because I don't want to sit down. But anyway.
And this was like, what year was this? This is like the late 1950s, early 1960s then, right?
No, probably, hang on a minute, 54. I suppose early 60s then. Early 60s.
Right. And apartheid had become law like in the late 1940s, 1950s, right? When the official apartheid rules came in, I think it was around the late 1940s, early 1950s. So this is, and it lasted until 1994, I think, right? It lasted for about 45, 50 years almost. So you were dealing with this right in the middle of all of this uprising, with the beginnings of the uprisings, right? So Veronica, how did you march to the front of the bus? Like, how did you know to do that?
Well, I just felt that the laws that people make, that was always in my heart and mind. They don't know me. I'm registered, but they don't know me. They don't know my home life with my children.
And how dare they tell you you're not white?
How can they tell me? How can they segregate me and my family to what they feel, what they are doing? That's not right. And that's why I lived my life. Mara always tell me, yes, you like white people. No, I do. I love all people, but I love myself as well. And I love my children. Above everything, I love my children.
And my mom did a great job. She really did. And I think, Jen, I have to say that, you know, I didn't think about it much, this interview you're doing with my mom, but it really is something. It really is something, because no one has ever done that with my mom or for my mom. And for her story to come out, do you know what I mean? It's just, for us, it was just part of life, but this is really something, you know, for her to be able to tell her story to others.
Like for you, Jen, I'm telling to you.
Yeah. And through me, we'll share it, you know, we'll share it. And I think it's so important that we all remember, you know, in some ways what I'm hoping this conference and this summit presents is that we are remembering also. Like, it's not that we're creating fierceness, but we are redefining it, and we're remembering and rekindling it and connecting with other women and other men, actually, who support women in this way. And I think it's so important to remember, because I think so many of us, and myself included, you see the headlines, right? You see the headlines and you don't really know what's going on, and you say, oh, that's a horrible thing. And, you know, strangely, the way I'm connected to you is even in a different way. In high school in the 1980s, I was in a Catholic high school in New Jersey, and I joined my friends and I started the Amnesty International group in our high school, and I was really involved in that. And we wrote letters to Reebok to support the sanctions so that apartheid could end in South Africa. And I was reading quite a lot about what was happening during that time. And we went to marches and we went to letter writing campaigns. And South Africa was one, I think it was 1986 or so. I think that's around when the anti-apartheid sanctions were coming in from the US and from other countries. And I remember wanting to know more about what was happening there. And I had read about the 1970s uprisings and feeling it. And growing up in a diverse place like Jersey City, where I was in a very mixed community, I couldn't understand the segregation, even though it had been in my own country, right? I was not exposed to that in a way that you were. So to know that there was this parallel world going on in my teenage years was quite impactful. So all these years later, when I hear, Leon is telling me about all these different things and that you were one of the threads that helped to break that system, right? In some ways, like, even if you weren't at the riots and confronting it, you and the people who ran these schools were able to maneuver this in a way so that your children and children in your neighborhood could receive a better education. And I thought, wow, like, this happens in so many ways that we don't know. So even if you knew you were just doing what you wanted to do for your kids, there was a risk,
Yes.
right? What could have like, do you know what could have happened if you had been caught doing this? Like, could you have
I
been
don't
jailed
know.
or something? You don't know.
I didn't feel.
Oh, do you know, Mum? Or do you know
No,
what the risks were?
no, I didn't know the risk. I didn't care about the risk, I suppose, because I was a determined woman. I'm not going to let the government that don't know me, they don't know me. What's registered there? Are they going to go through that registration to find out who I am? No, that didn't bother me. The most important thing to me in my home that I thought, they don't know me, so why should I let them affect me and my children?
So I think my mum just did what she felt she needed to do or wanted to do for her family and not allow the government to dictate where we should be. And I must say that even though it was difficult, as children, it was difficult to live with the name calling and that sort of thing. But I think like in years later, I must say that I met a lot of coloured South Africans here in Australia, ones that I never knew that lived literally around the corner. I never knew them then. But learning, once we were in Australia, I learned just how sheltered we grew up. We actually grew up very sheltered because we didn't know about the riots or go to these riots and things that kids did at schools where they boycotted and things like that. Well, I never knew about any of that. Never knew. So I get in that sense, we were very lucky, very fortunate.
I agree, and I
want.
Go ahead, Veronica. Go ahead, please.
Yes. No, I was just thinking that one particular day, it's a long time, I don't know if this is going to mean anything to you, but I remember I used to take my children to school, drive them, because we lived in Wetton and the school where they went to was in Claremont. Right, Margot?
About 20 minutes or something.
Yes, 20 minutes. So
about 20 minutes away. Okay.
20 minutes.
Okay.
So I drop my children at school and then I come home. But one particular day, my youngest child, Melanie, came home during school time. And I was so shocked. And what are you home for? Oh, I left my slip of paper to collect money for the school, for the church, I don't know. But I saw the paper, but I filled in everybody's name, all my children's names, and my sister and her children's names, because they didn't have addresses. They didn't need it. So I filled in all that to make up amount of money. And Melanie forgot it at home. And the nun sent her in the train to come home, to come and get this paper. And that infuriated me so very badly that I went to the school and I said, I waited for her because she was a young nun. And she made me stand and wait until I could talk to her. But I waited. I was patient. I waited. So I said, I bring my children to school because the safety that you have in the school is the reason that I bring my children here to school. And for you to send my child in the train to come home is not acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't even look at me. Maybe this means nothing to put in the book. I just wanted to share this.
No, but
Yeah.
I think it is. I think it is important because your willingness to always take a stand, your willingness to say this isn't just, this isn't okay, and to not worry
Yes.
that you may speak out of turn. For instance, right? You saw something that needed to be addressed. You went, you confronted it,
Yes.
you dealt with it. And I think there are so many things that we can sense here, right? Like, this is a step. It is a step for you to talk to a person of authority and say, yeah, this is, I come for this reason. Oh, Veronica, I think you froze a little bit.
Sorry, Jen.
It's okay. I think she's still there. The image is frozen, but the voice is still okay.
Oh, that's good. So,
So-
that's just my one story. Yeah.
Do you know how many children you've helped to get into the white schools? Did you keep count or
No,
no?
no, I didn't keep count because it was just people came to me to ask. And there's one particular friend that the mother and father came, but they lived in the country.
Mm-hmm.
In
Just in the country.
in the country.
Yeah,
And
in the
so
countryside.
they came to me, but they were very good friends of mine. And their daughter was school age, and she was 5.
Mhm.
And then I took her to the school where my children went to, Springfield Convent, and I enrolled her there. She was
Okay.
accepted.
Hmm.
So I was very pleased. And she lived with me for the week, and the weekends she used to go home. But then she used to come home back Sundays, and then Mondays I'll take her to school
Right.
with my children. And it's amazing how well they coped with her living there. But their mother and father were my friends and their father's friend. So it was really, she used to say, it's wonderful how my children,
Right.
6 children, could get on with her,
Right.
like
Well,
Colin. And I was really happy.
Became part of the family.
She became part of the family,
right.
and still this day, she doesn't live far away from here, 3 hours,
No, 6.
6 hours away from here. But she spent Christmas with us as a family. And she
It's
still
beautiful.
this day calls me her ma, which really
Well,
warms my heart.
and I feel that in so many ways we never really know the full impact of the
Yeah.
work that we do, right? I feel like, and in your case, you help these people because you felt called to help these children, these
Yes.
families, and
Yes,
have this direct link with this young girl who lived outside and lived with you. But I'm
yes,
sure if you found these other children who are adults now in their 50s and 60s, I suppose, right? That they would have this memory of you also. But maybe you don't know it.
absolutely.
You don't know.
They are, yes. There are many of them that still, that's why Leon always wants, he always gets a calls from different people and that. But, Jen, I'm, I'm not boasting about this, but I'm going to be 90. And you just brought this to me at this time. And it does make me emotional to think, I did all this not thinking that I was above everything, but I was a mother for my children. And that is the reason that I'm really happy that it's come this way.
It's a perfect time, Jen.
Yes.
I think it's a wonderful time for this. Where's me? I can't see me.
Your
Anyway,
image is frozen. There's a bit of an internet issue with the image, but I want to keep going by voice. It's okay.
That's okay.
We'll
I
figure it out.
think they say that nothing happens by accident. They say there are no accidents in life. And I think if there was any time at all for my mom, oh my God, now I'm getting emotional, that this is such a beautiful time for this to happen, for this part of her story to be told, for her to be able to speak about it. I think it's wonderful, really wonderful.
No, and yeah, thank you for saying yes to this, right? I felt like and Veronica, you'll be 90 in April, so right after this conference airs, and I I think it's important for all of us to remember, to go back to what I said before, just to remember and to honor this, right? To be in the space where we can look across generational lines and say, the women who've come before me took a stand. The women who come after me will take a stand in the way we show up in the world and define that and define the gift, right? You had a gift of saying, I see justice or I don't see justice. And the way that I could work the system at the time was to help your children and other children get into schools that would give them different opportunities. And I think that's
Right.
something that needs, a bit of a hat tip. Like, really, thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking that stand.
Oh, thank you for inviting
you.
us. Thank you for inviting my mom,
Yes.
because we lived it. So I guess we don't value it. Do you know what I mean? Until now, this moment when your interest is shown in my mom's story, it sort of makes you take a step back and appreciate my mom and the kind of woman that you are. And actually, I will take this time now to say perhaps that is what I got from my mom. that I've got that. I think I've got that part of my mom.
Yeah.
That
And congratulations,
no
Margo. That might be a great part to have also, right?
I think so, but you've made me realize it. So thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And I'm sad that I can't see you at this moment, but I don't, we'll just listen, and maybe this is the universe's sign of saying, listen with your heart here, that we don't need to be attached to the visual and just to go with it. Life is messy and internet isn't always working, but to really listen deeply into this and to hear, Veronica's story, to hear Margot's story in this reflection. What did your own mother do? What did your grandmother do? How did that come forth in your own story, right? I think this is I've been thinking a lot too about my grandmothers. And I only have one aunt left of that generation, my grandmother's sister, who's 96. And I have such a deep love for her because she's the last one of that generation that I have to talk to. And I don't know all the stories of my grandmothers. I know some of them, right? But I feel like having some of this sharing and creating the space for this to come out is really important. So, to those of you watching and not weren't wondering why the video is not there, just stay with it and listen to it and listen to the story. And Veronica, I want to ask you, because I know, while you were living in Cape Town and doing this with your children, and Margaret just said how sheltered she was, you didn't really know what was going on in other parts of the country. But you had to make a choice in the 1970s, around 1970, well, right after the riots in 1976. You had to choose to leave your country. So what happened there? What came up?
Because now you shared it before. The reason we decided to come over to Australia, we chose Canada or Australia, but we were accepted in Australia. But the reason that we wanted to get out of there, because we didn't know what was going to happen to Leon, because going to a white school, you have to go to the army. And that's one thing I didn't want.
Oh, Daddy.
And my husband and Leon himself. Well, Leon wasn't aware, but he too didn't know what was going on, when the letter came that he has to go to the army. I said, no, we're leaving. We're going, if we get accepted in Canada or in Australia, which, thank you, God, we were accepted in Australia. So we packed up, sold our house, and moved over here.
Which is, it's such a brave thing. And in the context of today's world, where we have so much movement, so many people who've had to face these choices of leaving behind their homelands for war or resources or economic reasons, and how and you facing the very real issue that your son would go into an army that and well, it was for white people, right? And there would be this knowing that he was registered then as colored, right? Which would have caused concern, right? Who knows what the impact of that would have been. But
yes, well,
was it difficult to make that
didn't
choice
know.
and to move?
Yes, well, we decided, because Leon always wanted to become a doctor, and he was ready to go to university. That was another problem. But when the problem came that he's got to go to the army, that was a no-no. We didn't want him to go to the army.
Right.
And that's when we decided. Leon and I were the two that filled in forms, application papers and stuff. And so when we were accepted, we packed up. And I had a friend, which was an attorney, and we handed it to her to sell the house for us, and she did. Yes, so
and you've been in
moved
Australia since 1977, right? This is
yes.
And have you gone back since? Have you visited South Africa?
Yes.
Years after that?
Once.
No. You
Yes.
and Daddy came back. My mum and Dad came back for the first time in 1983 when my husband died.
Okay.
Yes,
So
that's right. Yes.
my mum and Dad came back, and they wouldn't leave until I was ready to leave with my 3 children. So they were there for 3 months, and then we came to Australia, and my mum and I and 2 of my sisters, the 4 of us, went back to South Africa for a visit in 2003.
Okay.
And we were there for almost a month.
Okay.
And Cape Town is a beautiful place. It's a beautiful place. It still is. I think, you know how they say you can have 4 people have the same experience, but everybody has a different take on it or a different experience at that same time kind of thing.
Right. Right.
And I think that's what happened. I had a wonderful time. People are still the same beautiful, hospitable people that they always were in Cape Town.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the ugly bits in Cape Town, but it's still a pretty place.
Yeah.
But we've never been back since.
Yeah, I forgot that part where we came to get you.
Mm.
Yeah.
My mum forgot about the time when her and my dad came to Cape Town.
Yeah, because it was not your whole family who was able to go to Australia, right, at the time.
It was only me.
Yeah.
Only because I'm the oldest.
Uh-huh.
I was already married.
Okay.
And I had 2 children. So obviously the rest of my family all went because everybody else was younger than me. I was the only one married. So I was the only one left behind.
Okay. And then when did you go over to Australia? What year was that? 1983, I think you said.
Yeah. In
Okay.
83, after my husband died and my mum and dad came over, and they wouldn't leave without me. So in October of 1983, I came over with my 3 children and my mum and dad.
Okay.
Yes, and the lady there that accepted you was a wonderful lady. Yes. Yes, you say that part.
Say what, Mum? You
were
talk.
accepted. No.
I don't know what my mum's trying to say, but I don't think that it was difficult for me to be accepted because my husband and I had already applied to come to Australia.
Okay.
So our application was in there. And so then he died. And so I don't think that it was, I don't think there was much to it, you know, especially with my mum and dad being there and my husband having died. It wasn't a big, I don't think it was a big thing for us to then be accepted.
Well, and it was probably also a timing thing, right? There was quite a lot of pressure on South Africa at the time in the 1980s to begin to address this issue on a global scale. So I imagine Australia would have perhaps looked kindly to the application as well, considering the global
Yes.
stage at the time, right? Like,
Yeah.
you know, that's when a lot of the economic pressure was starting to come into light with South Africa, I believe. So,
Okay.
Mhm.
So it
but
was timing.
you know, the universe works in very magical ways. So who knows how that all
Yes.
came about?
Yes.
But Veronica, the impact you've had, you know, just on me and sharing your story, you know, what would you like to tell other women who are standing here now listening to you and connecting with our hearts in this space and having to make hard choices, right? Many women have had to leave the workforce, for instance, to take care of children during a global pandemic. And, you know, who knows how that will show back up in their lives again. But, you know, from the love of a mother who got her children into these different schools, into the white schools, what would you say to women who are facing really difficult choices right now?
What do I say to that? It's at the moment when I did that, I just thought to give my children the opportunity, you know. I didn't see it as a very hard job. It was my determination to feel that they went to school. I took them to school. I picked them up. It's a job. It's a job that you do for your children.
Women will have to make a lot of these choices soon, and Veronica, you've your presence in sharing this and what you've lived through, filtered through that. Where would you like to see women go with these really heart-centered choices?
Yes, well, those were the days when you could just go up there and do the things for your children. And
maybe it's harder now.
Yes, it might be harder now for people to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Margaret emphasizes on the fact that I always worked. There were times when I was at home. When they were little, I was at home. But when they grew older and bigger and fatter, I used to be there for them all the time.
Even when you worked, Mom.
Even when I worked, I used to come home and I was always there for them. And I suppose having the family and, how can I'm just stunned that I did all these things. I'm stunned because it was never, ever did I remember having a discussion with anybody, for that matter, what I've done. One day, Margaret told me, you got me this job. And I was stunned. I was taken aback because I don't remember. I got you this job. And, it's just amazing. It's amazing. And now that I got so emotional, I thought to myself, when did all this come together? Because it was the force in me. It's the love of my children that I only wanted the best for them. And school was one of them. And when they struggled to find a job, Margaret reminded me how I found this job for her. My daughter, Melanie, the baby she's not really the baby, my son is the baby, but I call her my baby. She one day said, oh, gee, I'd like to go work in a place where they sell cameras and things. So she told me the other day, you got me the job there. So it's the love and wisdom or what it was.
But Veronica, your fierceness, right? Like you say it, and the force of wanting to do this and thinking, wow, I really have done this over the course of my life, right? I'm so, I'm touched that you're remembering. Oh, hold on. I think there's a phone call coming in. Okay.
I'm just sorry.
I'm thinking, okay, the universe has told us, okay, we've had enough talking.
Well, Jenn, if ever you feel, you are so welcome to call me back if you like.
No, thank you so much. And I think for all of us, having your words and just, we don't remember our own impact, right? We just do the things that we feel called to do, and that's part of the gift. That's part of what we bring to the world, right? And I am touched. I'm touched that you're remembering also, and that you've been able to share this with us. It's really, you're fierce and awakened, Veronica.
I'm so pleased.
Thank you, Jenn. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenn, so much. And hey, I'll just tell you that I forgot. That's another thing you brought to my attention. My mom found quite a few of my jobs for me as well.
Right. Like the ripple effect of all of this, right? Like the women as, sort of the backbone, and we just do these things, right? And you're okay, somebody who could get you a job, somebody else who could get you somewhere else. You got kids into school, like the whole I always see it as this sort of, we're always just rolling out this cable of like light, right? We're kind of, okay, I'll connect you with this person, I'll connect you with this person. And now you and I are connected. I'm in Europe, you're in Australia, via South Africa to whoever's going to be watching this and, wherever in the world. And these little things that might just hit you in a certain moment. And you go, oh, I just heard this thing. And that will start some other ripple that will touch somebody else, right? And that's how I always see life. I just see it as this rolling out of like the electricity cables, like connecting villages, connecting people, connecting communities. So
Yes, that sounds great. Yeah.
Wow. This has been awesome, Jen. It's been absolutely wonderful. I must admit, I was not looking forward to it, but I'm so happy to be a part of it in this way, to be here and to be reminded of the wonderful mother that we've always had and that we've taken for granted, mind you.
I see Veronica like, yes. No, and thank you for showing up in this, like in this sort of very informal and dynamic way. I know that, Zoom connecting, Veronica, I was thinking, oh God, I probably scared you away. Like, we're going to do Zoom and figure out how to do this call and, across continents and, make it work somehow. But it felt like one of my most important invitations, really. Like, it felt like, having women who we wouldn't see, right? Like having women who've been working in the background for a long time and there's so many of us. There's so many who would say, no way am I going on video to talk about this. No way am I, I don't need to be visible, right? And this is a theme that came up for me last year, like how to be visible and how to help others, come into their story and share their lives, because we all learn from each other all the time, consciously or unconsciously. So,
and so it's a very big thank you to you, Jen. Really, thank you, because you have brought so much to the fore. Things that we take, like I said, take for granted. Our mum that we take for granted, she's always been there for all of her children, and a lot of it we've taken for granted. But it's nice to be reminded, especially me, because my mum getting older now, she's bloody hard work, but it's nice to be reminded.
Veronica,
payback time.
Are you, Veronica? I'm sure you're lovely in all the manners that you can be. No, but thank you both for your, incredibly honest interaction. I'm glad it was really organic and this sort of like, yeah, this is, the phone happens, the video went off, and you just kind of roll with all of it and just, thank you for showing up. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you,
Well,
from my heart to yours.